Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host, Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Now, in the Big Ten on Saturday is a game between two teams that are trying to find their way in a rugged Big Ten conference, with the Rutgers Scarlet Knights traveling on the road at the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Now, who do I think is going to win this game? Let's break it down. Now, Rutgers is 4-3 and 1-3 in the Big Ten to start the season, and Greg Schiano has done a really good job at Rutgers to try to build this program up from the Chris Ash era where it was awful. Obviously, Greg Schiano was Rutgers coach back in the 2000s, and he did good things there in the Big East, but now Rutgers is in the Big Ten where it's a lot tougher, and they've had a pretty good season so far this season for their standards. They beat Boston College 22-21 in week 1 on the road. That was a good win to win at an ACC school, even if Boston College is struggling. And then they beat Wagner 66-7, and that was a good win. And then they won at Temple 16-14. Obviously, this was a tough, gritty win at a group of 5. But then they had a 3-game losing streak in the Big Ten to Iowa 27-10. This game was not really a contest, and they let Iowa score 27 points, and Iowa's offense is really struggling. Then they lost at Ohio State 49-10, and this game wasn't close at all. It was at the Horseshoe, and they had no chance. And then they lost to Nebraska 14-13 at home in a game they could have easily won if they had just scored one more time. But then they bounced back after their bye week, and they beat Indiana 24-17. And obviously, this was a game where they were struggling early in the game, but they came back and beat Indiana. And that was their first Big Ten win of the season. And quarterback Noah Vedral returned in this game from injury against Indiana. And obviously, he's been struggling this season with injuries, but he is back and he is playing decent for Rutgers. He had 113 yards and a touchdown. He had 9 rushing yards against Indiana. Obviously, Noah Vedral, when he is healthy, can be a pretty good quarterback, but he hasn't been as efficient since he's been hurt. But I still think as he gets more healthy that toward the end of the season, I think Noah Vedral can improve for Rutgers. Running back Samuel Brown the fifth at 101 yards and a touchdown against Indiana. He's a really solid running back. He's a very beefy running back, and he can run through a lot of defenders in the Big Ten, which is really good for Rutgers, who doesn't have the best offensive line. Wide receiver Sean Ryan at 59 yards and a touchdown, and wide receiver Aaron Cruikshank at 12 yards, receiving and 64 rushing yards for Rutgers against Indiana. And Rutgers' offense is decent. They have pretty good players, but they're going to have to be more efficient on offense, turn the ball over less for them to achieve where they want to be. And do-it-all player Johnny Langan at 2 rushing yards, 24 receiving yards. I think Rutgers needs to get Johnny Langan more involved because he is a solid player, but they just sometimes don't know what to do with him. And on the defensive side of the ball, defensive back Christian Izzian at 9 tackles, a linebacker Deion Jennings at 6 tackles for Rutgers against Indiana. Rutgers' defense is much better than it used to be before Greg Schiano got there. Against teams in the Big Ten that are not as good, they play really good defense, but against teams that are better in the Big Ten, they do struggle on defense, but their defense is much better than it used to be when they used to give up points to everybody in the Big Ten. Now on the Minnesota side, Minnesota's 4-3 and 1-3 in the Big Ten as well, like Rutgers. And PJ Fleck has done a really good job at Minnesota because it is tough to recruit there. And they have had a lot of good seasons with him at head coach, but they've also had seasons that aren't as good as well. And Minnesota this season has been all up and down, and a lot of it has been due to injuries. They beat New Mexico State in week 1 38-0, and that was a good win. And then they beat Western Illinois 62-10, and that was a good win. And then they beat Colorado 49-7. And obviously Colorado's a really struggling football team, but it was still really good to pound them the way they did. And then they won at Michigan State 34-7, and that was their highlight win of the season because even though Michigan State is really struggling to get that win on the road, that was a really good win for Minnesota. But then it went all downhill from there. They lost to Purdue 20-10. Obviously, Mo Ibrahim, their star tailback, was hurt in this game, but still Minnesota's offense couldn't get anything going. And then they lost at Illinois 26-14, and they struggled on offense in this game as well, even though Mo Ibrahim was back. But unfortunately, quarterback Tanner Morgan got hurt. And then they lost at Penn State 45-17. They had no shot in this game, and they really tried, but Tanner Morgan was out in this game. And backup quarterback Athan Kalakmanis, he had 175 yards and 45 rushing yards. He had a touchdown through the air and an interception. He's a decent quarterback, but he's young, and it's going to take him a lot of time to get going on offense for Minnesota. I think he can play, but it's going to take some time for him to get fully adjusted to being the starting quarterback. If Tanner Morgan can return, he is questionable for Minnesota in this game. If he can return, I think that will help Minnesota out a lot because obviously Tanner Morgan has a lot more experience, but even Tanner Morgan has not been the same quarterback that he was at the beginning of this season in the 2019 season when he was really good, and he's been struggling at times times as well. Running back Mo Ibrahim at 102 yards and a touchdown. He's a fantastic running back when he's healthy. He's been injury prone the last couple of years, but he is a fantastic running back when he's on the field. Tight end Brevin Span 68 yards and a touchdown. Great tight end for Minnesota. Minnesota's always had great tight ends. And wide receiver Mike Brown-Stevens 55 yards for Minnesota. Minnesota's got a decent receiving core, but they have to get the ball to them. And on the defensive side of the ball, linebacker Mariano Marin 7 tackles, defensive back Jordan Howden at 4 tackles, and defensive back Beanie Bishop at 4 tackles. For Minnesota against Penn State, Minnesota's got a good defense, but obviously playing in the Big Ten, there's a lot of great offensive teams, and they have struggled against some of the better teams. But like Rutgers, when they're playing some of the teams that are more on their level, Minnesota's defense is a lot better. So who do I think is going to win this game? Both teams are really struggling on offense this season, and both teams are really struggling with injuries this season. Obviously, quarterback Noah Vedra for Rutgers and Mo Ibrahim and Tanner Morgan for Minnesota. Like I said, both offenses for Rutgers and Minnesota are really struggling, and both defenses are average. They're not at the top of the Big Ten on defense, but they're not at the worst of the Big Ten on defense either. I think that the home field advantage for Minnesota is going to make a difference in this game because both teams are very similar this season. Both teams are really struggling in the Big Ten this season, and I think P.J. Fleck obviously has a little bit better of a team at Minnesota than Greg Schiano does at Rutgers, even though Rutgers has improved under Greg Schiano. I think Minnesota is going to win 24-21 over Rutgers. I think Rutgers can win this game, but it's going to be very close, a very low-scoring game. Both offenses are going to struggle. Both defenses are going to be able to stop the offenses, but I think Minnesota is going to be able to score just a little bit more than Rutgers, especially because it's at home, and I think Minnesota is going to beat Rutgers 24-21. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below whether you think Minnesota or Rutgers is going to win this game and why, and I will see you next time.